Welcome back to Weems Motor Co. Let's shift this thing into gear. Alright, so last episode we were on the jury. We were getting a magneto ready, and as you can tell, we have that magneto installed, wired up, timed, ready to go. But we cannot start the engine without having a gearbox in this thing. So today's task is to put together a gearbox. Once again, if you've been following along with this build series, the jury, this motorcycle here, we are only using parts that we have in the shop laying around. Hopefully they're usable. Hopefully we don't have to repair things, but we are not allowed to spend a single penny. That means no gasket purchases, no spark plug purchases, only the things that are in this shop. So today we're gonna go over to the workbench and check out all of these gearboxes that I pulled out for this bike. All right, ladies and gentlemen, so what we have here is 6 pre-unit gearbox housings. Now, not all of these housings will work in that bike that we're calling the jury, because some of these housings are for swing arm pre-units and the jury is a factory rigid frame Triumph. So we have to be able to take some of these insides and transfer them over to a rigid gearbox housing. Now, that's easy because a lot of these are interchangeable. Now, you had wide ratio, close ratio, and standard ratio gear clusters. So those are the things that we're gonna have to pay attention to, but otherwise, pretty much you could take a gear cluster out of, oh man, all 4 speeds, pretty much up until 1972, which was the last year for the 4-speed. Late 72, they released a very limited amount, I believe it was October of 1972, of this 5-speed transmission gearbox, whatever you want to call them. So we could pretty much interchange all of those. We did a breakdown of a 1971 engine on a few episodes back. We have that gearbox cluster set to the side because we may be able to use that one. Now, there's tons of these laying up on the bench. I have a few more in storage. I have a few more on the back porch. So I am almost positive that we can get together at least one rigid gearbox housing and all of the internals and externals that we need to get it onto the jury. So let's break these down. All right, first off, I just wanted to give you guys a little bit of details with the differences between the swing arm gearbox housings and the rigid gearbox housings, along with some intricacies that change throughout the years that you kind of want to know when it comes to piecing these things together. Last thing you want to do is to put these parts together and realize that they're not going to work with your frame or engine application. So first off, let's talk about the difference between the rigid housing and the swing arm housing. Now, this right here, what we have is one of the rigid gearbox housings. The simple way to tell is along the top side of it, you're gonna see a small little boss. That's where your gearbox adjuster goes. Now, on the swing arm bikes, the housing boss at the top, you can tell, is centered and it is a lot larger. So this is a swing arm housing and this is a rigid housing. Now, some things to also note, I was looking at these all the way through 1962. All of the pre-units had bushings on the gearbox. Now, that's on the lay shaft way back there in the back. Instead of there being a needle bearing, there would be a bushing back there. However, on this particular swing arm gearbox housing, somebody did an upgrade and they put the needle bearing conversion in that you would find in 1963 with the unit construction engines. It's pretty cool. You can interchange those things. They had the same tolerance outside diameter, so you can put those in. It's a good upgrade because, you know, bearings are a lot better than bushings. So that's what's in this swing arm housing. However, we can't use this swing arm housing because we are doing a rigid frame, which needs a rigid gearbox. All right, next thing to note is the inner gearbox cover. Now this is the part that goes, the outside cover goes on, and then you have the gearbox housing on the back. These were all interchangeable, so you gotta be really careful when you're piecing things together when it comes to these. Up until 1958 they changed this. 1957 and earlier, you'll find these inner covers with this boss at the top that is threaded. That is where your cable, your clutch cable, hooks in there, and then you have a clutch push rod actuator that goes and operates there. So if you find that your cover has this boss on it, you know that it's 1957 and earlier. Now, like I said, all of this stuff is interchangeable. Case in point, I have this gearbox. That is the earlier style that does not have that on there. Somebody pieced this one together and did not do it correctly, because the way that this actuator arm comes, there's no cable abutment. It's not gonna work properly. They had a few different gearbox adjusters that went and changed throughout the years, so you got to be really particular looking at what model and what year bike you have, because they were changing things throughout the years from the factory. Now let's talk about these outer covers. Alright, so looking at our covers, this is the type of cover that you would find on factory rigid Triumph frames, being this big large hole inspection cover where you would go in and adjust your clutch push rod adjustment right there. Now this would be all the way through 1957 utilizing this cover, so you're gonna have some swing arm bikes still utilizing this all the way through 1958, because in 1958 they came out with a new gearbox option, and it had a cover like this that had this diamond shaped inspection cover that had 2 screws, and you could go in and adjust your clutch push rod. Now instead of your actuator arm coming from the bottom going towards the top, now it went sideways. It was a new design, and this gearbox was called a slick shift gearbox. Now, super cool design, optioned in 1958. What this did was it allowed the rider to not have to use the clutch after he gets out of first gear. That means you have to use the clutch to take off in first, but then everything after that, that actuator arm actually engages a little ball bearing detent. So as you're pushing the shifter pedal down, this rides in a ramp and it automatically pushes that clutch push rod, disengaging your clutch as you shift. Really cool design. It wasn't really well received at the beginning. A lot of people thought it felt weird because they were still trying to pull the clutch as they're shifting. It didn't hurt anything to do that, but it wasn't necessary. So what a lot of people did was actually took that little ball bearing area and just cut it off, and it went back to being a standard clutch lever pulled shifting sequence. So it's really hard to find these slick shifts where they haven't cut that mechanism off. So anytime that I find one at swap meets or laying around, I always make sure I hold on to them because it is a really cool design. I actually used a slick shift gearbox on our build Hollywood Run. Really cool design. It would be really neat for like jockey shifting, things like that. Maybe a racing application where you just take off and then you're just shifting gears. You don't have to worry about clutches. So really cool design. Those are the different covers, different gearboxes throughout the years. Now we talked through that, we need to get over to the bench and figure out what we're gonna do, if we're gonna rip down one of those that are already complete, or we're gonna use that 1971 gear cluster from that unit construction. So let's go figure out which housings and which parts we're gonna use. Alright, so one thing last to note before we rip into these things is that there were serial numbers stamped on gearbox housings. Now, they didn't match the frames, they didn't match the motors. in order to find out exactly what that came out on, you have to contact someone who has the factory dispatch records. I happen to have a friend who has all of those factory dispatch records, and I could find out what specific gearbox went with what engine into what frame. Now, Triumph did not match the frame numbers to the motors until 1950, so everything is convoluted back then. But actually I think it was 1949 was when they did that. But it's kind of convoluted, but I know that I don't have matching engines going into matching frames and all of that. Those are special projects that I store in the storage unit or I have set to the side so I don't mix up those pieces and parts. These are all donors. These are ready to go into whatever configuration I need to build them in. So with that, we're gonna grab up one of these rigid housings and check the condition, make sure it's not cracked, make sure it's not damaged. If it does, we might have to repair it. But I'm pretty positive that I have one of these. I got like 3 of them laying up here. One of these 3 will be usable for this project. So I'm gonna grab that up, make sure it's clean, make sure it's good, and then we can move on to the inner cover and get an outer cover, and then we can worry about that inner gearbox cluster. So let's grab a housing. All right, so we got 2 housings here that are completely empty. One has had some repairs on it. One is in really great shape. Probably not going to use that one. I have a special project that one's going to go to. And then we have this monstrosity that looks like Frankenstein got pulled out of the junk pile. So bad welds on it, but it's a complete gearbox. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this gearbox, break it all the way down, make sure that the components are good inside, and utilize as much as I can from the internals on this one, and probably put it inside of this housing that has had some repairs on it, keeping that nice cherry one for special projects. So let's break this gearbox down, see what the internals look like, and fingers crossed we can use a lot of stuff on the inside of this. Let's get to work. Now I know I can hear you right now. I know what you're saying to yourself. Weems, that's junk. Actually, it's not. All right, there's some good usable parts in this. You may not think so, but I know so. But yeah, let's just say that some of these repairs that they've been done on this gearbox housing is pretty sad, to say the least. But I love it because these guys were just trying to keep their bike on the road, just trying to keep their knees in the breeze, have the wind blowing in their hair, and they did stuff like this. So years later, somebody like me have to go in and address these issues. Well, thank goodness I have all the extra parts and everything we need. Like I said, we're going into the belly of this gearbox and see what's usable. I'm keeping my fingers crossed. Things are kind of coming apart pretty easily. It's a good thing when it's wet on the inside because that means it's not dry and rusted up. So I don't mind a little bit of gooiness or grossness because I know that we can get in here and use some of these parts. So that being said, let's get this inner cover off and let's find out what this gear set looks like. right, now, that was a mess. Typically these things come apart pretty easily when you pull that one little shaft out. Well, the problem is that's rusted together, so none of those gears wanted to come out the way they're supposed to. So we got them out though. Took a little drift and drifted from behind so that we can get that cluster out of there. Now the point is to figure out, what is this? I mean, seriously guys, I have no clue. It looks like a piece of crushed copper tubing in the shape of a 6. Now, never seen anything like this before. This was on the back side of the shifter quadrant. Why it was there, no clue. They were maybe trying to shim it out. There's no shims there. There's none of that stuff. Don't have a clue. This kind of stuff, no bueno. Just goes to show you with all the other repairs and mess that's going on in that housing that whoever was in there last time does not need to be in any gearbox or anything. I don't know. They're jacked up. Regardless, we're gonna take the rest of the day, go through, clean all this gunky stuff up, see what is serviceable, what is not, and we will catch it back up tomorrow with you guys, and we'll hopefully have a full gear cluster ready to go back in some clean housing. So you guys stick around. Alright, here we are back again the next day. I took the better part of yesterday afternoon inspecting and cleaning, and this morning made a trip over to the storage unit because we did find some bad stuff. Now, that pre-unit gear cluster that was in there, it's a little bit far gone for what I'm wanting to use on this project. So went ahead and said we had that 71, and I've only used the tappet blocks and the tappets from that, so I was like, why not just scavenge some of those stuff if it's good? And everything was good minus one gear. Now, this gear had a broken tooth right there. I was able to source one in gorgeous shape over in our storage unit. Nice, ready to be used on this gear cluster. So let's see what we got laying here. So with that new main shaft third gear in place, we have a complete 1971 4-speed gear cluster. All of these parts, like we were talking about before, were pretty much interchangeable, but you have to be very careful that you don't mix match parts, especially when it comes to those gears, because you're gonna have some binding issues and yada, yada, yada. So try to keep everything all correct for that particular year. So we will in fact have a 71 4-speed gear cluster in a pre-unit housing, which means, I'm sorry to whoever gets this later on in life and is wanting to work and they're gonna wonder what in the world's going on there. Sorry, it's a custom build. It is what it is. Now, in order to make all of that work, only one part needs to come from the pre-unit housing, and that just happens to be that shaft that was stuck in that old housing. So, the differences in those, if you look at the end of them, you're gonna see that that bottom one there is stepped. Now, that is your pre-unit style shaft. Now, the reason it's smaller because it fits into the back of the housing. Later on, they enlarged the size of it, just a tighter tolerance and everything. So we have to use that pre-unit shaft. It's the same length, no worries there. But outside of that, I'm gonna stop talking because I feel like I've been talking this whole video. Always remember, if you're watching Weems Motor Co., we don't do how-to videos, okay? I say we make videos that say, hey, watch how I do this, because there's 99 ways to skin a cat, and this is just the way I'm doing it. So, shutting up, getting to work, putting this gear cluster all together. Let's make it happen. we got one complete rigid pre-unit Triumph 4-speed gearbox all together. Got our brackets, got our bolts. Too easy to get this thing in the frame, so let's just knock that out. And voila, there you have it, folks. We have a gearbox into the jury. Talk about success. We were still able to do this without spending any money, only scrounging for parts we had laying around. Well, next time we're gonna be doing the primary. And once we got the primary in, then it's gonna move pretty quickly because we only have getting it into a roller, throwing a tank on there, putting a seat, a fender, carburetors, exhaust. A lot of quick stuff that we'll probably wrap up in 1 or 2 short videos. But with that, I am stoked about it. It's been a blast carrying you along doing this budget build. Man, if you guys are new around here, jump down and hit that subscribe button. If you really like the video, hit that thumbs up, turn those notifications on, and let everyone know what's going on right here at Weems Motor Co. Peace!